Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Shauna Greeley, and I'm the chair of the Chartered Accountants Diversity and Inclusion Committee. I would like to welcome you all to this afternoon's webinar, Effective Salary and Package Negotiation Strategies for Women. I'm really looking forward to listening to our three speakers and hearing their tips on what is a hugely interesting topic. We will be running a panel discussion at the end. We will explore the topic further. And we would welcome your questions, so please feel free to put them into the Q&A box, which you should see at the top of your screen or in the chat function, and we'll pick them up as we come to the conclusion of the various speakers. And now to introduce our speakers. So our first speaker is Karen Lanigan, and Karen is going to provide us with salary negotiation tips. Karen will be familiar to many of the attendees today. She is Head of Member Experience for Chartered Accountants Ireland. Karen has over 20 years' experience working in the area of financial and executive recruitment and is a qualified career and life coach. She has spent the last 15 years providing career advice and support to members of Chartered Accountants Ireland. She established the Career Mentor Programme and has also supported many diversity and inclusion initiatives run by the Institute, including the Returners Workshop. Karen will be followed by Elaine Brady, who will speak about recruitment, market perspective, salary trends, and give us some tips and advice in this area. Elaine is Managing Partner of Barden, Ireland. Following an undergrad in business with Trinity, Elaine joined the recruitment profession in 2004 and held a number of leadership roles with key recruitment firms before founding Barden in 2014. Elaine advises leadership teams across Leinster on their talent attraction and retention strategy and is a regular speaker at Institute events. And then our final speaker of the afternoon is Gillian Harford, who is going to discuss diversity and inclusion and HR perspectives. Gillian is a senior HR executive who works directly with client organisations focusing on diversity and workplace change, and also operates as the country executive for the 30% Club in Ireland, which is a global campaign supported by chairs and CEOs driving gender balance on boards and at C-suite. Gillian is the former head of HR strategy and planning with AIB, where with a career spanning almost 40 years, she has been responsible for significant people change with a particular focus on culture, career, diversity, and agile work. So to start, I will hand you back to Karen.
Thanks so much, Shauna. I'm just going to share my slides there now. If you just bear with me a second, just to make sure that they're coming up. So here we go. So thank you so much to everybody who has joined us this afternoon, and it's great to see I suppose the interest in this area. I was just saying to the rest of the speakers earlier that I was out for a walk at lunchtime with one of my friends who's actually an engineer, and I was explaining to her that we were running this webinar, and she said, "My goodness, I'd be really interested in that." So like we all know, it's a universally I suppose a universal area of interest. So what I'm going to do today, and this is based on my own experience, as Shauna said, of quite a number of years in the recruitment and careers advisory area, and I'm going to give you some very, I suppose, practical and insightful tips and advice in relation to career related matters, but specifically around the whole area of negotiating your salary. And it is something that obviously is a key thing for all of us, because ultimately at the end of the day it is I suppose a big motivator for us all. So we're going to give you those practical insights and suggestions, and also I suppose giving you those suggestions around how you can get the outcome that you're looking for and ultimately secure a salary that you're happy with and that you find motivational. I'd also like to take the opportunity to highlight some of the supports that we have available to Institute members as well. So, and obviously then, as Shauna said, to deal with any questions or queries that you might have at the end of the webinar as well. So look, we all know that negotiation skills are, fundamental to our career success. And I suppose there are skills, it's a skill set that is important across all facets of our life. There's no doubt about that, but it's I suppose particularly relevant in terms of your career development and advancement in general. And when I'm talking about kind of negotiating your salary, I'm also talking about this from a wider perspective. I'm talking about it from the perspective of working conditions, and like that would relate to, say, negotiating flexible working arrangements, for example, which I know has been, kind of top of the agenda for a number of certainly members that I have spoken to. We're talking about our overall package. We're also talking about like your general career path and overall career development, and also then within that will be discussions specifically around your role. And also obviously negotiation skills do help us in terms of having overall credibility within our roles and within our career. And it also then will help in terms of getting support and resources generally, but also in terms of investment in our careers. So really important skills. So I suppose before I go into that in a little bit more detail, I suppose that there's a key point that I just wanted to make here, that ultimately your career success is dependent on the overall management of your career. So that is fundamental in general. So it's just, I suppose, a point that I wanted to make, that you do need to be really conscious in terms of managing and that effective management of your career in general, so that, like, I suppose your career is moving forward, that you're progressing, that it's going according to plan, and that obviously then puts you in a really good position then to effectively negotiate your salary. So I suppose it'd be remiss of me just to look at purely the salary side without mentioning obviously the effective management of your career in general. So what I'm going to touch on now is just some of the research that I came across as part of the preparation for the webinar, and some of the findings are quite stark actually, and in that Glassdoor are telling us just this year, in fact, that women are less likely to negotiate their compensation, with 60% of women not negotiating their pay compared to about 52% of men. We've also seen that women graduates in Ireland expect to earn up to 14% less than their male counterparts, and that is a concern because I suppose you want to kind of start out your career as you mean to continue. So that was something that struck me certainly. And then in the US, a study of graduating MBA students found that 50% of men had negotiated job offers as compared to 12.5%. So again, that is really interesting, and I do see that in my day-to-day role, that men are generally more likely to negotiate when it comes to job offers. And then lastly, then that men are more likely to get the salary increase that they ask for relative to females. So where 20% of men will get the pay rise they've asked for versus 15%. So a pretty stark stats and research. But look, all is not lost. There are things that you can do in this space, and that's what I wanted to focus on today, and to be positive and proactive. And this is a good time to be looking at this area because there's much more focus on the kind of salary balance and equity than there has ever been before. And you personally can take responsibility and actions to help in terms of negotiating the salary that is reflective of your skill set, your experience, and ultimately that motivates you. I do know we have some male members joining us today, so you're very welcome. And all of the tips that I'm presenting today are equally as relevant to men as they are to females. But I will be I suppose touching on some of the nuances specifically for females in this context. And I'd also like to kind of mention that I suppose there is an opportunity for, you know, male leaders to support their colleagues in this space as well, and to take a proactive role in terms of ensuring that you know, their colleagues and you know, I suppose their team members or I suppose kind of other colleagues do actually get the salary levels that, you know, are fair and reflective of their experience. So to start taking you through the tips, the first one is essentially, you know, it will come as no surprise, but it's essentially to know the market, and to take that time to research the market, you know, to network inside and outside of your organization to gather those insights. It's really important that you understand what's happening in the marketplace, what are the shifts, what are the trends, and, you know, to speak to as many people as you can. So whether that's through the Institute Career Service or indeed the likes of Barden, and obviously Elaine has joined us here today from Barden. So it's to speak with, you know, kind of reputable specialist recruiters to get that insight. And it's really important that you get, you know, I suppose realistic and objective data, because, you know, we all know that, I suppose, if you know, speaking to people, they can sometimes inflate their salary. So it's making sure that the people that you're speaking to are providing you with, you know, reliable information and information you can count on, because it is really important, because ultimately this is what you're going to base your request or your negotiations on. So that's the first tip, you know, to get that understanding of the market. The other thing then is to get the timing right. And, you know, we all know timing is everything. In most organizations, there is a cycle and a HR cycle, and there's, I suppose, an appropriate time of year to consider asking for a salary review. And you're much more likely to get the answer that you're looking for, to even have that conversation, if you work within those parameters. So I would suggest that where possible, that you stick with those parameters. Also, obviously, you know, it's going to be an easier ask if the company is performing well and you're also performing well as well. So again, that'll just lead to a much easier conversation. And similarly, like if your relationship is on a good footing with your manager, you'd be much more likely to you know, to get a positive response. And also, you know, timing that right in terms of, you know, approaching whoever it is you need to speak to, in terms of your line manager, approaching that at a time where, you know, they're not under pressure, they're not stressed. So really selecting the right time is really, really important. I know it sounds pretty basic, but, you know, it is pretty fundamental in terms of ensuring your success. The next tip I have is to carefully frame the ask, and that's really, really important in terms of making sure that, you know, you have given this plenty of thought, and that you're pitching the ask in the right way, because again, that can be very much fundamental in terms of securing your success. You know, like I suppose this is the hardest part in terms of building up that, you know, that confidence to ask the question. But what I would say is, like, if you don't ask and you don't, you know, I suppose put the question out there, you will always be wondering, you know, what would happen. You know, it will start to kind of, I suppose, grate on you. It will start to impact on your confidence. So it's really important that, you know, if you feel that this is something that, you know, is justified, and that you want to do, that you do carefully plan this. You know, I suppose in the environment that we're in as well, you know, with a skills shortage, you know, employers won't be necessarily too surprised to hear that you know, you're looking for a review. So, you know, it's a good time in that sense to ask that question. And, you know, by carefully planning it, you know, you will be able to frame that ask you know, appropriately. So I've given some suggestions here in terms of how you might do that. So the first one is by saying, I've been reflecting on the last 12 months and my strong contribution to the organization and salary history, and I believe I should be considered for a pay rise. Can we set aside time to discuss this further? So, like, you're putting it out there in a very kind of positive way, a very balanced way, and then you're asking, you know, to kind of set aside time. So you're not, I suppose, just pouncing on your line manager. You're then, you know, giving them time to consider it. The second one then is, thank you for making this time to meet with me. I'm really enjoying my current role and responsibilities, and I'm excited to continue to work ambitiously as a result. I would like to discuss my salary. So this is like when you're in that meeting and putting forward that suggestion. And again, you know, you're putting it on a very positive, you know, starting it on a very positive note, which is again is really you know, I suppose an important consideration. So the next one then, which I'm actually having slight difficulties in seeing with the bar here at the end of my screen, but thank you for meeting with me. I'd like to share with you some of my recent achievements and would like to open a discussion around salary. So again, it's, you know, focusing on the positives, it's focusing on, you know, what you bring to what you brought to the organization, and it's about, you know, putting that rationale out there in terms of explaining why it is that you know, you would like to have your salary reviewed. So you're giving that kind of rationale and justification for it, and again also in a very positive way, which is really, really important. So moving on then, I've given you some kind of suggestions in terms of what to say and what not. So the first part is, like, you know, I suppose not to, you know, make this sound kind of needy, and making it very personal to your own circumstances in terms of things like saying, I'm struggling to make ends meet, or, you know, I want to buy whatever it might be, because that generally doesn't sit well with employers. Also, you know, my peers and colleagues are on more money. That's not necessarily the way to frame it. I would frame it from a broader kind of market perspective. I also would suggest that you don't say, look, I can earn more money elsewhere, because that can be seen as a threat, and you don't want to get into that adversarial type of conversation. And for us females, that can land, you know, I suppose negatively, because of I suppose the stereotyping, and sometimes where if we're seen to be a little bit more aggressive in that space, it can land more negatively than it might do for our male counterparts. And lastly, then it's you know, I suppose to make sure that you're not apologizing for the ask, and that's something that, you know, us females tend to do more so, and we apologize, you know, for asking, or apologize for saying something. So it's really important that you don't start on that footing, because you're already, you know, I suppose on the back foot. So it's all about not complaining and framing it really, really positively. So rather than what I've mentioned there, you know, what you should be saying is, look, the market rate for a chartered accountant with my experience is, and this is where your research is going to come into play. Secondly, then you could say, I feel an increase is warranted as I saved X amount for the organization and managed whatever number of projects. So again, you're justifying it and you're giving the rationale. Also, you could frame it by saying, in the next 12 months, I plan to support the business with, and whatever those suggestions might be. So you're showing the value add that you're going to bring to the organization over the next 12 months. So the organization and your manager can see, well, look, actually, do you know what, this additional spend or additional salary is going to reap rewards for the organization, and we can see a return on investment for our you know, the additional salary that we are going to be paying. And then the other I suppose approach is to say, look, I would like to plan a long-term future with the business, and on that basis I would like to have a discussion around my salary. So it's all about influencing that conversation. So this is all about how you kind of frame it, pitch it, all very much in that, you know, positive way, and showing how you have made a contribution to the organization and how you plan to do so going forward. So moving on then, the next tip I have is, be ready to explain why you're worth an increase in salary. And this comes back to what I was saying earlier, just in terms of having a really compelling rationale ready. And that takes a bit of preparation in terms of, looking at, what you've contributed to the organization over the last, number of months or years, keeping a journal of your achievements and, the things that you've done that have made a difference within the organization, or indeed have made your manager look good. And if you can back this up with any metrics from across the organization, that would be really helpful too. And just let the data do the talking and I suppose kind of justify and back up your ask in this space. And it makes it much more, objective and less personal, that you can just back this up with the data in terms of the stats. So then the other area just to mention would be, if there are any skills that you have added over the last 12 or 18 months that have helped you in your role, or are there areas where you've taken on more responsibility, or you've delivered projects, or where you've surpassed your goals. So really what you're looking to do is to kind of back up that rationale. And it's all about making sure that you're showcasing the impact and the positive impact that you have made within your role and within the organization. And, you have to bear in mind that, it's not always about the kind of the business as usual responsibilities. They generally, if to kind of help you justify your salary ask, it is all about how you've gone above and beyond the business as usual responsibilities. So that's something to keep in mind, and to really showcase those examples where you have those. So moving on then, it's all about boosting your confidence and empowering yourself. And this is the area that I find, if there's a challenge in relation to salary negotiation for us women, this can be the area that, we struggle with in terms of having that confidence to actually go and ask the question. So it is all about, believing in yourself, backing yourself, and reminding yourself that, look, I am a chartered accountant. I have the experience. I am bringing value to the organization, and making sure that you don't underestimate or devalue the achievements that you've had over the last number of years. And again, it comes back to writing down those achievements, reminding of yourself of your successes, looking for feedback from your colleagues, just to kind of back up what you're saying in terms of how you're adding value. And also engaging a mentor or a coach can help in this areas as well, just to kind of give you that independent, I suppose, kind of support and validation as well. So it's just really important to, kind of build on I suppose your confidence, and remind yourself, as I said, of those successes to give you that, I suppose, supercharge, or that boost in confidence that you need to really go in and make that request, as it were. So then the next tip I have for you is to make sure that you're clear on what you're looking for, and to really to give that some very serious consideration, and think, well, look, what am I looking for out of these negotiations? What would represent success for me? Is it purely just an ask around salary, or am I also looking for them to, like, for my employer to look at other aspects of my package, whether it's, holiday, salary, bonus, or things like training, development, career opportunities as well. Maybe that, as I mentioned earlier, that opportunity for flexible working arrangements. So it's really to think about this very clearly, map it out, and know exactly what it is that you want to get from this process. And a good way to do this is actually to write it down, make a list, and then put them in an order of preference as to what is, what's a, I suppose, a deal breaker for you. What absolutely are you hoping to get from this, and then moving down the list from there. Now, bearing in mind, some aspects of your package can tend to be more negotiable than others. So, for example, some organizations won't move around things like, say, holidays, for example, because they want to maintain or streamline kind of the holidays across the organization. So they they can be slightly more difficult asks. But you know, it is about, you know, looking at this from a you know, a more like a wider perspective, and you know, don't be afraid to kind of ask for support and advice from others, to get their input in terms of how best to frame it. The next tip I have then is around considering your body language, and this is really important. You know, it's up there with, you know, I suppose how you frame that ask, but again, it's something that you can really prepare for, and it is all about, you know, kind of practicing how you're going to come across, not just in terms of your tone, but also your body language, and you know, I suppose presenting in a positive way with positive you know, I suppose body language, you know, with a smile, etc., can really help to diffuse any kind of adversarial atmosphere that there might be around this. So it's looking at your posture, it's looking at your expressions, your gestures, and it's all about conveying the right message. And also, I suppose, things like, you know, eye contact, making sure that you are making eye contact, and that can be a little bit more difficult if this is going to be a virtual conversation. So it's just making sure that you're used to that you know, again, you've taken a bit of time to consider how you're coming across, and trying to make sure that you're not coming across as being too nervous. Now, obviously, you're going to be a little bit nervous. That's totally understandable for a conversation like this, but it's trying to kind of keep those nerves at bay. What's also particularly important is avoiding any aggressive maneuvers, because these can particularly backfire for women. And you know, it is all about, you know, how you frame this, how you position it, and this is I suppose kind of related to the stereotyping element that can influence these conversations, where women are perceived to be more calm, you know, and then if it does come across like you're being a little bit more aggressive in this space, that it can, I suppose, change the mood and change the tone around the conversation. So it's very important that you stay calm and avoid, as I said, those aggressive maneuvers. It's also important to dress the part, because obviously that, you know, I suppose helps you to present well, but also as well, it gives you a sense of being more confident as well. I think that like certainly helps in terms of feeling that, you know, you're dressing the part. And ultimately, try as much as you can. I know it's not always easy, but to try and relax and smile and to be yourself. And I think if you've done the preparation in advance, it will help to boost your confidence. So just as an overview then, you know, I've touched on this a few times to say, look, you know, prepare in advance as much as you can, and plan your approach, plan your request. And that involves, you know, obviously, you know, monitoring the market, getting your background, getting the sense of where the market is at from a very realistic, you know, data-driven perspective, and have your I suppose data ready in terms of how you've added value to the organization. And also then make sure that you're working on your confidence, and make sure that you're not just saying to yourself, oh no, look, you know, I shouldn't do this, you know, because, and making excuses. And often the biggest barrier is just making that decision to go ahead and ask for the conversation. Now, if it doesn't go according to plan, having a plan B is really, really important. And that could be as simple as saying, well, look, okay, we haven't agreed to something today, but can we agree to revisit this again in 6 months' time? So, you know, at least you're getting something from the conversation then to say, look, can we discuss this again at a later stage? And also to ask the question, you know, well, what do I need to do to ensure that my salary will be increased? You know, so to ask that question, and that you know very clearly exactly what it is that you need to do to I suppose to secure that salary increase that you're looking for. The other thing I would say is to make sure that you're requesting a salary review on a regular basis, and don't let it slip for a couple of years without having those conversations. And you take that opportunity on an annual basis to have that conversation, rather than letting it slip for a couple of years, and then you're trying to make up that ground, which can often be quite difficult. And the other thing I would say to you is, like, celebrate your success. When you get what you're looking for, like, you deserve to celebrate. So why not, you know, celebrate that success. The other thing I just want to mention to you is, look, you're not alone in this space. We are here to help you. And there are a range of career development supports and services that are available to you, including advice around your salary, career coaching, and guidance around salary discussions and review, and also market advice in relation to the market itself and you know, how it's performing. So do reach out to us, just simply at careers@charteredaccountants.ie. So thank you so much for listening today. Happy to take any questions at the end of the session. So I am now going to hand you over to Elaine Brady from Barden. Thank you so much.
Great. Karen, thank you so much for that. So my name is Elaine Brady and I'm the managing partner and co-founder of Barden here in Dublin. We're a partner-led recruitment practice consumed with supporting companies who really know the value of their people. So that's why I was thrilled when Karen and the team reached out to me to be part of today's session. Ensuring everyone attending today has the right information to make an informed decision and ultimately to be armed with the right tools to appropriately negotiate salaries is very much at the heart of what we do at Barden. So really what I wanted to focus on today was basically maybe to share some of the facts about the current market for accountants, and then also some tips to help you maybe have a very successful negotiation process. So on to the dreaded topic of salary. Look, it doesn't matter whether you are just starting out your career in finance or you're already a CFO. Like, we all dread any conversation, even touching the subject of salary. And why? Well, it's because it's not like any other deal you make in your life. It's intrinsically related to your self-worth. In short, you are not just negotiating a pay rate to do a job, you're negotiating how much you as a person and as a professional are essentially kind of valued at. And that's what makes it so difficult. So for the last number of years, we've partnered with Chartered Accountants Ireland's Leinster Society to produce the only data-driven accounting salary survey on the market. I mentioned the phrase data-driven here very, very specifically because, as mentioned by Karen, that's one of the really key aspects of any successful negotiation, having market-specific facts and data researched in advance of any conversations on the topic. Some of the headline findings from the salary survey, look, they're very, very impressive. A chartered accountant with 5 years PQE has an average salary of over €83,000, and the overall average salary package of a chartered accountant across all levels is just over €112,000. However, before we all start frantically running in trying to arrange meetings with managers to renegotiate, what we need to bear in mind is these numbers are average numbers, mean numbers across a number of respondents. It does not mean that all ACAs with 5 years PQE secure a salary package of over 83k. And actually pinpointing an exact market rate as you progress up through levels of PQE becomes even more difficult. It becomes far less about your official year's PQE and more actually about the value that you're creating for your organization. It's based on a myriad of factors. It's the scale of the business you work in, the organizational structure, remit of role, size and breakdown of team, reporting lines, projects outside of BAU. The list is literally endless. For example, we've been engaged in Barden to recruit FC roles for 3 million turnover companies at a 75k package, and also FCs for large listed businesses, turnovers in billions for 150k package. And as you can imagine, there's a huge difference in the requirements for both of those roles, even though they ultimately have the same title. So in preparation for today's topic, I gathered some additional data from basically, I suppose, a number of the different placements across Barden since the beginning of this year. And what I wanted was the data or stats and what the reality actually is out there, and to work out if males actually do negotiate more than females, or is it just essentially a kind of a misperception that's out there. And unfortunately, the findings made for very, very grim reading. So look, the facts that I found, now bearing in mind, of course, over essentially a 10-month period, was that men are actually 2.6 times more likely to negotiate their salary than women. Now, bearing in mind, that's when changing roles externally in the marketplace. That's the only data we ultimately have. So if you think about that, for every 5 men who negotiate their salary when changing roles externally, only 2 women do the same. Look, of course, not all of them are successful, of course not, but it's very, very sobering statistic, I think, for all of us here today to reflect on. We're also all kind of reading about, look, the Great Resignation or the Big Quit, as it's being called, and maybe wondering what that means for our own situations. And I think really kind of to stay or to go, that's going to be the real career question for a lot of people from 2022 and beyond. And ultimately, the salary negotiation process is different in both situations. External moves to a new employer and associated salaries, they're effectively governed by a different rule set. They're much more market dominated. So what does the market dictate should be paid for this role? What's the availability of similar talent commanding on the market? What salary band does the organisation have sign off on to go to market with? In general, the higher the supply of talent in your specialist area, the lower the opportunity to negotiate anything outside of a formal salary band. While of course it's very important to negotiate in these instances, salary expectations that push outside of that band can become a major barrier to successfully securing your role of choice. And internal negotiations, so that is essentially where you currently work for the company already. Here, negotiations around salary, they're substantially more complex as they're based on both previous and potential future performance. It becomes about your internal reputation, how you're perceived across the business, how well you do your role, what's your leadership potential for the company. These are the types of negotiations that can actually be very highly emotive. And that's why we, unfortunately, sometimes as women, veer away from having those conversations, really because of how uncomfortable they can make us feel. But actually, it's here that having a conversation to a specialist expert recruiter in advance of any negotiation conversation will really help prepare you. What they'll do is they'll be able to give you specific market information and rates that a salary survey just won't be able to pinpoint accurately enough. I'll actually delve into this part of the negotiation process again later in some of my tips section, but you might wonder then, look, outside of your own experience, what else might affect essentially how you can negotiate your salary. Another one of the findings from the salary survey is, look, that basically we're at full employment across the market. 96% of chartered accountants are at full-time employment. From the client side then, it's 18 months of pent-up demand also being released now onto the market, and employment prospects or volumes of roles out there really has never been greater, or really greater that I've seen in kind of 17 years of recruitment. However, the fundamentals of economic demand and supply really hold true here. So when demand for accountants on the market is higher than the number of candidates available, then you're in a very, very strong position to negotiate salaries and packages. And that's completely gender agnostic too. However, interestingly, we also know it's not all just about basic pay for people either. So we know from the survey again that 81% of you would sacrifice between kind of 5 and 10% of your salary for better work-life balance or more flexible working arrangements. So look at location flexibility that, again, Karen kind of briefly touched on, it's essentially the location from which you do the majority of your work. Like, it's the new variable in package negotiations beyond a shadow of a doubt. It's how much time you save on your commute, the costs associated with both getting to and being in the office have become key considerations for people when negotiating either new or existing packages. And then, as touched on earlier, internal salary and package negotiations, they have that additional layer of complexity, not as present in external negotiations. So really what I wanted to share with you is 5 key tips that we advise here in Barden to help ensure a successful negotiation process. So firstly, try as much as possible to move emotion from your pitch. Look, even acknowledging the above statement highlights why so many of these conversations can become emotional or even avoided altogether. The reality is that we don't want to have these conversations because they can be deeply uncomfortable, and moreover, we all as human beings fear rejection. Recognizing this and trying to look at the situation objectively is imperative to securing a good outcome. And then secondly, speak in facts and quantify where possible. So there's only one way to succeed in any negotiation, and that is through preparation, and absolutely lots of it. Construct your case based on facts and figures that support your claims. So again, as mentioned earlier, while it's important to review salary surveys, speaking to that specialist expert recruiter who really knows your specialism and your area inside out will likely give you a very comprehensive market rate to work off. Ground that argument in quantifiable data to clearly demonstrate what you've achieved rather than what you feel. Just like you wouldn't go into a supplier negotiation with an argument to reduce prices because you feel like you deserve it. So really just don't do it here. And then number 3, look, be careful of your tone and your demeanor. So one of the most important steps to any successful salary conversation is to resist becoming defensive by maintaining a cool head. So don't rush to fill pauses in the discussion. Let your manager speak, listen, consider their point of view. And if you do feel a rush of emotion that comes with an answer that you don't like, just pause and consider your response. Pause, but do not react. Above all then, be open and honest and show humility. Self-entitlement in any salary negotiation is not necessarily a good look. And then so number 4, look, be sure to root it in your company's processes. So it helps if your salary review and appraisal process are linked, but they aren't always. So if you are negotiating a salary increase without an appraisal structure, you need to present your case by measuring and assessing your performance in a very, very similar way. What objectives have you exceeded? Where have you added value? How can you demonstrate that proven track record of high performance? And then finally, and probably most importantly, strive for a win-win solution. Nobody can negotiate something that isn't possible. It doesn't matter how brilliantly you've been doing. Before presenting your case, do your research into what your employer can afford to pay. And luckily, I suppose, as finance professionals, you're probably likely privy to that information. An employer isn't going to give you an increase that pushes beyond what the company can ultimately afford to pay. Again, if that is the case, then look, you need to maybe consider the variables, the non-monetary parts of your compensation, as mentioned by Karen, additional holidays, more flexibility in working hours, increased learning. A key one that can be used very well is potential profit share based on future success of a business, or bonus potential based on future success of a business, and how you might be able to also contribute towards that goal. There's lots of options out there that won't ultimately cost an employer anything for now, but could hugely increase your quality of life and future earning potential. But above all, you have to maintain a collaborative approach at every stage of the negotiation process. Think about presenting that case to your employer that shows what's in it for them too, how you plan to keep improving and how dedicated you are to maximizing return on their investment in you. Thank you. And now I will pass you over to Gillian Hartford of the 30% Club.
Thank you, Elaine. So it's really interesting for me coming in behind Elaine and Karen, who've really spoken so authoritatively and interesting in terms of how you go about it from a personal perspective. So Karen asked me to maybe talk about it from a D&I perspective, and then from an organization view through the lens of HR and the D&I plan. So hopefully what I'm going to talk about will help you think about where your conversations might fit in terms of what your organization is trying to achieve in terms of diversity and inclusion. So for those of you who aren't aware of us, the 30% Club is a global campaign supported by chairs and CEOs of medium to large organizations who are committed to changing gender balance at the most senior levels, not because it's a good thing to do, but because it's a good business outcome. It makes absolute sense in terms of making your business more successful. And I have the lucky job of spending time talking to more than 280 of Ireland's largest employers. So I get a chance to talk about lots of different things. And I thought if I talk to you about the 3 or 4 things that we see that are consistent across organizations in their focus at the moment, it might help put some of these things in context. There's no magic bullet in terms of achieving better gender balance or improving the D&I environment within your organization. It's about picking from a menu in terms of what works, particularly in terms of the culture of your organization and where you're at on your D&I journey. But most of the things that I see can be built around 3 or 4 buckets. So the first bucket that we see organizations really trying to focus on and grapple with is the idea of raising awareness. because what gets talked about gets done. And if your organization is starting to talk much more about diversity and inclusion, it means the conversations are focusing on barriers to progress, difference in terms of how men and women are treated, the offering that we put in place, how that links to our values, how that links to our culture. And we're going to see awareness starting to focus on particular topics. So one, for example, that could be really useful to you in terms of salary negotiations. In the first half of 2022, we're going to see more organizations raising awareness around gender pay gap, for example, and what's driving it. Is it being driven by pay equity, or is it being driven by inequity in terms of representation at senior levels? So all of those opportunities to raise awareness open the door for you in terms of good conversations. The second thing that we see organizations focusing on is around the talent pipeline. And particularly, as Elaine said, when we're practically at full employment in certain sectors, organizations are looking seriously at how do they attract, how do they retain, and how do they progress? Because it's one thing to get an individual in the door, how do you keep them? And this is driving much more focus on transparency. What are our terms and conditions? What do we offer? How do we put our pitch out there in terms of what's available? But it's not just the pitch. It's also about the process in terms of how I access it as an employee, and what does my experience look like compared to the organization promise. So this leaves much better opportunity for conversations around total package, for conversations around the softer benefits as well as the harder benefits. And it also means that organizations, again, start to look at the differences in terms of the gender offering and also gender retention, and how could that help you in your conversations. The third area we're really starting to see focus on as a much newer area is one I call Mind the Gap. And Mind the Gap is not about gender pay gap. Mind the Gap is about small gaps in our careers, particularly small gaps that are driven by family absences. So how do organizations make sure that when talent leaves temporarily for a family break, whether it's maternity leave, paternity leave, or parental leave, how do they bring that employee back as efficiently and as effectively, but also in terms of back on the career track as quickly as possible? So how do we make sure as an organization that family absences are part of a career rather than separate to a career? Because if you look across a 40-year career history, a period of 9 or 10 months on maternity leave or a period of 5 or 6 months on parental leave is a very small part of that journey. And that is actually starting to drive conversations around what's important to employees in terms of offboarding when they go on leave and onboarding when they're back from leave, particularly around how do I make sure I come back without having lost any parity? How do I come back in terms of not having lost out on my career progression? And I know there is a question in the chat room, and hopefully we get time to have a look at it, though I'm looking at the time ticking away here. But there is a question there about my responsibility in terms of negotiation as part of maternity leave. But I'm also seeing us drive conversations around what is the accountability in the organization to make sure that I don't lose out when I'm on any kind of family leave. And the fourth area that we are really seeing focus on, and it's been disrupted positively and negatively by COVID, is the whole idea of creating a more modern and agile workplace. And this is organizations thinking about what's important to employees in terms of a modern organization, particularly in terms of the employment offering. And it was really interesting when Karen was talking about, we're all interested in negotiating so much more than just money, but we're really interested in negotiating a very positive experience in whatever that may be. So that leads to conversations around control, around flexibility, around work-life blend. And what we're seeing across organizations is that it's not just a technical test of does remote working actually happen. And COVID was amazing in that sense, in terms of being the perfect disruptor. And any organization that said pre-COVID that they couldn't manage many of their work processes in a remote environment were proved wrong overnight. But what we do need to focus on is how do we come out of COVID and continue on that journey going forward. So it's not just about an agile workplace. It's also about agile work processes so that I can be more productive no matter where I'm working from. And then finally, it's really about agile leadership in terms of how does the organization enable me and my team to work in a more agile way so that ultimately work becomes about what we do, not just about where we go. And we've done some research. A lot of it was pre-COVID, some of it is during COVID. And the number one enabler that was identified in terms of career progression, which obviously includes salary progression, was flexibility around how and where my work gets done. And the most surprising thing was that men and women equally put this at top of their list. So in terms of the negotiation package, it becomes a really important factor going forward. So these are the four areas from a HR perspective and a D&I perspective that we're seeing focus on. In terms of how do they relate to the topic today, it drives the environment and the culture where you can be comfortable in negotiating. It does create a better environment for men and women to equally ask for what they need, because it starts to build a more adult to adult relationship, which is the best sign of a modern workplace. And then finally, it focuses on changing the system. We don't look at D&I initiatives that change women. We look at D&I initiatives that change the system so that men and women can thrive. Because ultimately, diversity means I'm here. Inclusion means I'm heard. But real change comes from balance in roles of influence. And that's where we need to drive. Hopefully some of these issues will come out in Q&A if we have time. But thanks for the chance to talk to you today. So I'm now handing back to Shauna, who hopefully is going to lead us through some Q&A.
Okay, thank you, Gillian, and thank you to Karen and Elaine. So just in terms of the Q&A, we have a couple of questions that have been asked into the Q&A chat box. So I might start with the first of those. So a question from Nuala. I'd be interested to hear the panel's comments on how they think the working from home versus working in the office, and how that will impact on overall salaries, and would there be a difference between the salary package of someone who is at home versus in the office? And I think that's actually a very, very interesting and pertinent question, just given the current ongoing working from home. So I might ask Elaine that, because you might see some of that in terms of when you're negotiating packages with people you're recruiting
Shauna. Absolutely. And look, I suppose in a very kind of brief synopsis, yes, look, we're seeing this happen all the time. And I think what we need to start doing actually is getting an understanding of what certain things mean. Okay, so there's a very substantial difference between, say, remote working, okay, which is 100% remote with maybe a very, very rare trip to an office, versus hybrid working, which is again a 2, 3, 4 day a week. You're likely to live somewhere within the general vicinity of your office, to a fully office-based role. Okay, and what we are seeing is some of the early adopters of the fully remote working, which in general tend to be the larger tech organizations. They tend to ultimately, what a lot of those are doing at the moment is they're actually doing what they're calling a salary correction exercise. Okay, so people who ultimately have chosen to work completely remotely, more than the majority of them have up sticks and have moved somewhere further away from the office than is commutable. Those people are going through processes that are actually having their salaries normal, what they're calling, they're being corrected to be in line with where they're currently living. Okay, so that is absolutely happening and is happening out there. What is probably less likely to happen is people who are 100% office-based and people who are hybrid working. Those people are likely still living within a commutable distance and are going into the office a couple of days a week. What we're seeing is those are ultimately staying the same. There doesn't seem to be any type of a correction going on. But for people who are fully remote working now, yes, that absolutely is happening.
Okay, that's very, very interesting, Elaine, and maybe somewhat surprising.
Yeah.
So I might just, in the interest of time, maybe move on to some of the other questions. So I've a question here about, well, I have two kind of related questions. One is about, how long is it acceptable to be out of the workplace after looking after a family? And then there was another one in relation to negotiating pay negotiations after returning from maternity leave, and is it possible to renegotiate a salary? So maybe Gillian, would you take one of those, and we might just put the other one to either Elaine or Karen.
Yes, I'd be delighted to take the second part if that was okay. Absolutely. Maternity leave, as I said, has to be seen as part of your career rather than a stepping away from your career. It's not an exit, and absolutely it should be included as part of the salary review process and the salary negotiation process. And ideally, what you would hope is that organizations would facilitate that as part of the offboarding and onboarding. I always like to talk about the fact that a salary negotiation in terms of fixed pay is not about what you get, it's about the potential that you have to earn when you're on maternity leave. Whether you're on maternity benefit with top up or whether you're on unpaid leave, it's not an additional cost for the organization. What you're doing is protecting your parity for when you return. So just to give a very small example, and I'll give an AIB example from my previous life, and this came out as part of our gender pay gap review, because we did gender pay gap reporting in the UK. All of our salaries were actually tied to a performance rating. So if you got X rating, you got Y salary increase. But when you were on maternity leave, you weren't there to get a performance rating. So with no performance rating, no salary increase. So if you went on maternity leave once or twice or even 3 times, you could fall behind your male counterparts very quickly. And we looked at that with a D&I hat on rather than just a pay hat. And we said, well, actually, whether you're there or not, you should get a rating. So we introduced the facility where your manager gave you a rating in your absence. If you didn't like the rating, you could appeal it, but it was supposed to be based on your average rating in the last 3 years. So your salary review was applied while you were on maternity leave, and it was there ready for you when you went back on payroll afterwards. And that really increased the potential for women to maintain parity in the same job as their male counterparts, who were less likely to go on family leave. And if they did, it was on a much shorter absence. So absolutely, maternity leave, just because you're on maternity leave, is not a reason to lose out. Bonus conversations are probably slightly different because they are based on contracts that you're working on. But even then, if there's something you're working on before you go on maternity leave and you've made a strong contribution to it, again, I would have had bonus systems where you would have been entitled to a percentage of the bonus. So don't lose out.
Okay, thank you very much, Gillian. And I just see that we're a minute past 4 o'clock. So given that I think we had committed to finishing at 4, Karen, I think we probably need to bring this to a conclusion.
Absolutely.
Which is a bit unfortunate.
It is indeed. But what I would say is that, for those whose questions have been unanswered, if they email them through to careers@charteredaccountants.ie, I'll make sure that we come back to them with an answer, or they can contact me directly.
That would be fantastic.
Yeah, so look, don't feel you've missed out on getting that opportunity to get the questions answered. Do come back to me. And as I said, it's careers@charteredaccountants.ie.
Okay, thank you, Karen, for facilitating that.
No problem.
So maybe I'll very quickly wind us up. I think that was an absolutely fantastic webinar. I know I certainly got a few useful tips from it. I'd like to, on behalf of all the attendees today, and there was quite a considerable number of us, I'd like to thank our three amazing speakers. So Karen Lanigan, Elaine Brady, and Gillian Harford. I know you've given absolutely fantastic advice. And I'd also like to thank Barden Recruitment for partnering with us to bring this webinar. And then on behalf of Chartered Accountants Diversity and Inclusion Committee, I'd like to thank everyone for attending, and also to wish you all the very best of luck in putting these tips into practice, which I'm sure you'll very successfully do. So thank you again for attending.
Thank you. Thanks, Shauna. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.